future of work. That's what it is we're talking about today. Now, I would say, as we're all part of a digital leadership forum, we all know, and as we've just seen in those poll results, that, the nature of work, is changing. Digital transformation driving profound changes across both what we do, how we do it, and of course, more recently, where we do it. And I think all of us understand that we're in this kind of period that has been described as a great acceleration. We thought things were moving quickly in this space, and then COVID arrived, and that acceleration has simply just increased. I've read several commentators suggesting that we've kind of gone through about 10 years of digital transformation in the last year. And as William Gibson so famously said, the future is already here. All of the things that I'm going to be talking about and all of the ideas that many of us have, someone is doing them somewhere. But of course, it behoves us to kind of find that best practice, find that piece of the future, and bring it into our own workplaces and our own organizations. Because of course, these changes are not just impacting sort of the workplace as a generic kind of space, but it's actually changing the types of jobs that we're doing. So obviously, technology is impacting industries at a different pace. I was just speaking to someone in my breakout group who's in the tech space. So you would expect someone in an industry like that to be ahead of, say, some of the other types of industry, like let's say, for example, real estate. So industries are moving at different paces depending on the kind of level of their technological integration. But the World Economic Forum's most recent Future of Jobs survey, just out relatively recently, is estimating 85 million jobs displaced by this shifting division of labor between humans, machines, and algorithms by 2025. That's 4 years away. That's not some distant future. That is really within anybody's planning window. But of course, it's not all bad news. At the same time, 97 million new roles emerging. So actually, there's good news there. There are new jobs coming along, more of them that are being lost. And you can see in these two images here, the kind of roles that are in increasing demand, the kind of jobs that are going to be in increasing demand, and also how that kind of shift is happening between who's doing the work, that shift between human and machine across a number of different types of industry. And for those of you interested in your own futures, why wouldn't you be? You could always, just for a bit of fun, go to replaced by robot and type in the job that you do and see how likely you are to still have a job in 5 years from now. It's just a bit of fun. I wouldn't call it a deep piece of academic research, but it's actually quite interesting and quite fun. And I'm sure that the team can share these slides if you don't have a moment to grab that web address. Okay, so new workplaces, new jobs means new skills. Again, the World Economic Forum, and for those of you who are perhaps at the beginning of your journey in this space, I highly recommend the content from the World Economic Forum. Really worth a look at your own industry or your own kind of job families that you're interested in, because the research is obviously top notch, and there's a lot of data as well as their kind of overview of what's going on. But in their view, the top 10 skills for 2025, you could really think of these in sort of two categories I would propose. The new sort of technical specialist skills won't surprise anyone to see that they're data. I would say the number one when we're talking to clients too, regardless of industry. People need to quickly upskill their staff right across their organizations just to the next level in how they're using all this amazing data that we've been collecting in the cloud over the last few years. Cyber, of course, let's keep it secure, especially with lots of people working at home. But those tech skills are, of course, only half of the skills equation. At the same time, we need to be foregrounding those skills that robots can't do yet. This is where, thank goodness, we can still add value. There's still room for us in our workplaces, because there's still an enormous growth and enormous demand for creativity, ideation, originality, and initiative. I think we're way away from that being replaced by robots. The analytical thinking and complex problem solving. I mean, again, that might be more data driven than it used to be, but you've still got to be a certain kind of thinker. And you've got to be a learner. And I'm going to say more about that. And that comes out in a great deal of the research, is that interest in and ability to learn is going to be key to enable you to keep up on this constantly evolving journey. And of course, leadership, not traditional command and control leadership, as we used to call it when I used to teach management in a university. These days, it's much more about, flat hierarchies and social influence. So those are skills that, again, many of us need to develop. And I've just added, in fact, to the World Economic Forum's thinking here, my own thoughts on the skills agenda that's being driven by COVID. And we're seeing now increasingly conversations around things like resilience and well-being, meaning and purpose, how you support staff to get that. And of course, I guess that's why I would point to something like coaching as a kind of bench strength that organizations are realizing they need to improve their skills in that space to support their staff through these difficult times. So something for everyone there. But of course, there are skills gaps, and some of these skills are quite hard to find, and that's leaving those organizations that don't have them, quite a disadvantage to their competitors. So in order to sort of unlock the benefits of digital transformation, we really need to make sure that the skills and capabilities needed to thrive are really at the forefront of our minds. But it's not a small challenge. Again, from the World Economic Forum, 50% of employees need reskilling by 2025. And for even those of us that might stay in our current role, 40% of the things that we were doing last year and this year will not be relevant by 2025. So all of us need to be engaged with this, whether we're L&D professionals, chief exec, strategy, digital transformation leads, or just individuals. This is, I guess, a call to action for us all. And as I think I said at the top when I was talking to Clive, Singapore is actually very, very switched on in this space. And the major businesses here get this. And in fact, you'll notice that this came out just before the budget last year, and it was before we really had any idea what we were in for. COVID had arrived in Singapore, we were starting to respond, but there was certainly no real understanding of the depths of the COVID challenge. And yet, even before that, major business leaders, and I mean, this was a long article on this day, and literally hundreds of business leaders echoing this notion that it's going to be about capability building, filling those skills gaps, training, upskilling, and so on. So yes, this is on the agenda in Singapore, and I think that is why Singapore does kind of lead the way in this space. However, despite those calls for action, that there is a challenge. People recognize it, that at the bottom here from McKinsey, 78% of people surveyed, HR and C-suite executives, recognize very or extremely important capability building to sort of manage for the long term. However, quite a number of those people weren't ready. In essence, that's because some of them just haven't got their plans organized. 28%, for example, have begun discussions but haven't got beyond that. So quite a lot of work to do here. And that on the top right there, people recognize that organizations have to lead. But again, for those of you, just thinking about your own careers and your own growth, there is a recognition that as individuals, we also have to bring ourselves to this conversation and bring ourselves to this party. We cannot sit back and point at our HR colleagues and expect them to get on with it. So a lot to do here. So how are organizations going to actually build these organizations of the future, create the work and the jobs and the skills for the future? Well, many forward-thinking digital leaders are accelerating their capability analysis. I mean, it begins with that baseline of understanding what are the skills you have. And quite often you might be quite surprised, because quite often what you might find is there are individuals who actually have skills you may not even be harnessing in your organization. They may have developed those skills for a personal interest, or for an outside role, or for some other reason. So quite often just having that baseline understanding of where are my skills, what are my skills in the organization, is a really important starting point for organizations and for leaders. And then you need to work out, well, what are the priorities? You know, there may be a huge transformation journey in front of you. You can't do it all at once. Not only do budgets preclude that, but also, you know, the time and attention span and the capacity of your, for example, your L&D team and so on. So you really need to work out what are the capability priorities, which parts of the business, which levels of the business, what matches our kind of strategic needs most immediately, and another important process. And then this culture of ongoing learning, and I'm going to say a little bit more about that in a moment. But clearly, you need a workforce that's engaged with the learning proposition that you want to bring to them, and will take some ownership of that learning proposition. And of course, with such a huge task in front of them, L&D teams are challenged, I would say, to sort of build the institutional capacity to manage this extremely complex skills landscape that's in front of them, and how much strategic work they need to do alongside perhaps the more traditional kind of just, you know, buy a training course and get your colleagues to go along. That has changed. So in order to kind of move that agenda forward, making a business case for the investment in learning is obviously something that critically engages digital transformation leaders, HR leaders, business unit leaders, and others across the business. You know, no longer is it good enough to say, well, 25 people went and spent a day at a workshop, you know, tick. Businesses quite rightly are looking for something that tells them a bit more about how this is going to impact the actual capabilities of the organization. And in order to do that, of course, it's about ensuring you've got that sort of alignment of your people strategy with your overall business strategy. And the data is there, as this chart on the right hand side will show. You know, over and over again, you can read about and find examples of businesses and academics talking about you know, the benefit of reskilling. But I would imagine that for many of us, you know, our bosses want something a little bit more concrete than that. So, you know, that's a new challenge, I think, for many people in this space, to try and work out how really to make sure that anything you're doing is really aligning with the business strategy and delivering that impact that you're looking for, making the change that you're looking for. So that actually means thinking about return on investment, I would say, right up front. It's almost too late. Well, it's certainly too late after the fact to go, well, what's our return on investment? You know, you need to be ensuring that what you're thinking about doing will have an ROI, does meet business strategy objectives. And these are some quite challenging areas to reflect upon. So what does this mean for the future of work, for the future of jobs? And I would propose it means that the organizations that are really going to get ahead are organizations that are learning organizations. And this is not a new concept. Peter Senge first wrote about the learning organization in a book called The Fifth Discipline in the early 90s. So, you know, quite some time people have been talking about it. But I would say the urgency is probably greater than ever, given what I was saying at the beginning about how quickly the agenda is changing, how fast skills are kind of going out of date, rate, and how much change there is in the business environment. So, in order to create an organization that can continue on this journey to meet the new challenges that are thrown at them continuously, um, there need to be some quite foundational pieces of work done within organizations. And I would propose that some of those basics are, you've got to have good quality upskilling programs. If the programs aren't relevant and of high quality, you're going to frustrate your staff, spend money and not have the impact that you're looking for. So obviously that's kind of has to be front and center, but that alone is not enough. And I think it's really important to recognize that you need to create a supportive learning environment. That means a space in which, when somebody wants to, engage with some learning, it's not sort of frowned upon or seen as a way to, avoid a sales meeting or whatever it might be, but that there's conversation and an engagement and an encouragement of people to learn, that it's part of other types of processes in the organization, so that line managers talk to people about what are you learning, so that HR processes encourage that kind of growth mindset that I think I've mentioned before on an earlier session. And then, of course, the processes and practices that are easy for people to access. People need bite-sized learning. People need relevant learning. You have to make sure that it's easy for people to access high-quality learning, and that leadership behavior reinforces it. I think many of us are familiar with a space in which we're trying to encourage others to learn, but the C-suite somehow feel that they're immune from that. And getting that C-suite engagement is so important, and finding ways to bring that voice into the organization is really important. A short video clip from the chief exec saying how important this program is, or it doesn't have to be complicated, but these are really important kind of cultural symbols in an organization, to say, we value learning. And if we're going to succeed, all of us, to sort of cling on over this incredible roller coaster ride that we're going through, it does take all of those building blocks. But what does the learning look like as we move forward? I mean, we have all been, I'm certain, we've all trooped off site for a day, for a workshop somewhere, had a nice lunch perhaps, worried a bit about all the emails that we're missing whilst we're away from our desks. And then we've gone back to work, tried to manage that pile of emails that came in while we were away, and kind of forgotten all about it and carried on as we were before. I think that has been a real issue for training in the past. But what does it look like now and in the future? How can we get learning to kind of deliver to this agenda in a more impactful way? Well, yes, content is always going to be king. But what I would say in that space is, let's face it, content is becoming very cheap. You could Google almost anything you want to know. It's been democratized knowledge in many ways. So content has to be relevant. What you might need to learn if you're in the oil and gas sector around data, let's say, or digital, or any of those other buzzwords, isn't going to look the same as what it is you need to learn if you're in financial services. So kind of agnostic content can be quite problematic. So I think relevance is increasingly important. I would say there's a slight move away from kind of skills. I can use this piece of software, to I have the ability to learn new pieces of software, and to teach myself and have the confidence to take on a new piece of software, perhaps with just some guided support. That's an important shift, I would say, in learning. Convenience definitely matters. If it's not mobile, if it's not bite size, people are no longer going to be trooping off site for an entire day. I think those times, even when we're through COVID, are unlikely to return. But people still want to connect with one another. And I think that was the disappointment of MOOCs, those massive online courses that came out to great excitement and fanfare. You could do a course from Harvard, but you sat there watching recorded videos on your own. And frankly, the engagement and completion rates were hugely disappointing. I think the latest research shows only 2 or 3% of people that sign up actually finish those courses. So people do want to connect with others, and learning has to have platforms to do that. And learners need to apply what they're doing. It's only through the application of your new skills and knowledge that it actually becomes really what we would call in the profession deep learning that stays with you. Otherwise, it will disappear from your mind and you'll go about doing things the same way as you used to. Learning needs to be personalized. What I need isn't the same as what you need. And that requires understanding A, where I'm coming from, and B, where I want to go to. So that sort of individual planning needs to be part of this. And I would say you need to create the case for change within an organization. Why do we need to do this? Why is learning important? That, I think, is also new in this space, is that recognition that actually marketing teams can bring an awful lot to the party here in terms of ensuring that how you're communicating about learning, the need for learning, is really important. And that mindset changes, yes. I mean, you can't just go on a 2-hour webinar and think differently. It's going to take a little bit more than that. So what can you all do to make some change, today? Well, I think the first thing I'd want to say is there's real good news here. I mean, what we've just been through has shown that the workforce is unbelievably resilient and adaptable, but we need to sustain this change now and in a way kind of, get back in control of it rather than it sort of being in control of us. So we need to sort of seize the opportunity of the crisis, in that famous phrase, never let a good crisis go to waste, to both think really critically about the future of work in our organizations, employ the lessons that we've learned. There have been some fantastic innovations and some goodwill built up over the last year. But you need to think about, how do you move that agenda forward? And I would just propose to you as I finish now, that it's about keeping up with that radical change. Yes, you need to keep business as usual going and prepare for the future at the same time, but you've got to create those opportunities for staff to deliver to these new strategies as you create this more flexible and digitally engaged workforce that's always engaged with thinking about what they can learn individually as teams and as an organization, that will continue to support both adaptability and resilience, and therefore I would say, future-proof your talent. So in many ways, I would propose that, the call to action is more urgent than ever before, and it's going to be those organizations that can really harness their staff and future-proof their talent that will emerge from this crisis stronger than before. Thanks very much.